Hey everyone, Sparrow here, and we are jumping right into today's build with our lovely mud pillar trick to create a round building. I think this is my third attempt at doing so. I had to do a few test builds and proof of concepts beforehand to even see if it would work the way I wanted it to, but I'm happy to say that yes, it did work out in the end. If you're a returning viewer, hello, fancy seeing you here once more. I am so grateful you're back. And if you've just stumbled across my channel because maybe you like penguins, welcome. I hope you stay a while and thanks for watching. I will say the channel seems to have slowed down a lot since hitting 1,000 subscribers. My current goal is actually hitting at least 500 views on each video, which last week's video came close to. It actually ranked much better than other recent videos for some reason. My best guess is because people are so starved for birds in PlanetZoo that bird videos, even if they're building piece birds, do well on YouTube. Well, penguins are also technically birds, so we'll see how this one does. If you're willing, please do help me out with this goal of 500 views per video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and also just watch as much of the video as possible since average view time makes a big difference to the YouTube algorithm. With that said, let's jump right in here so I can explain exactly what it is that's happening on screen. This building will house two different animals, the king penguin and the gray seal, which you can look forward to seeing next week when we complete the cold dome. The inspiration for the building came from some AI art I stumbled across. It was very sleek and modern and had this icy feel to it that I thought was perfect for the animals I'm looking to put in here. So the cold dome is going to have this semicircular facade on the front with big glass windows. I'm going to copy this shape a few times and tilt it forwards like we did on the front of the Boreal Cafe. The exterior walls have these colored stripes on them. I thought they looked too plain without it, so those are the architectural girders sunk into the wall and recolored a light gray, dark gray, and one of the TNS teals. For the roof, I used plaster panels recolored white, and as you can see, flared out the sides of that semicircle to have the roof meet the walls. I wanted the design to kind of mimic an igloo, but with a much more modern touch. Even though the building is not entirely circular, I think the white roof does that job quite well. I'm honestly imagining this building to be one of the newest additions to the zoo. Actually, the remainder of the habitats we'll be building here will have this modern vibe to them. So maybe the zoo just had a bunch of money to funnel into this building, or it was sponsored by a company of some sort, and that's why it's so massive and standing out from everything else. The architect they hired was very excited and got a little carried away perhaps. That architect is definitely not me. So you may have clicked on this video because you saw penguins in the title, and maybe your second thought was, penguins? Why are they in a northern zoo and in a section called the Arctic Zone? Sparrow, you're stupid, penguins don't live in the Arctic. And yes, I know. But with the various zoo projects I have planned where I will be building for every single animal, the king penguin was kind of an odd one out and didn't fit my vision for the other zoos that are closer to its natural range, such as the Australian Zoo, which I started with the little penguins actually, so make sure to check out that video if you haven't already. So yes, the king penguin will find itself in True North Sanctuary because this zoo will feature other colder climate animals, and none of the other zoos really do that, which means that we can also use this opportunity to educate guests on the fact that polar bears, for example, don't actually ever hunt penguins because they live on opposite poles from each other. So the plan for this last part of the zoo is to have the penguins on the far right, the polar bears on the far left, and the seals in between. Kind of a myth dispelling layout where the penguins and polar bears are separated by the animal that polar bears are actually likely to hunt. And of course, there will be many education boards and signs, maybe even a custom one that I'll create, talking about how king penguins live on sub-Antarctic islands, while polar bears and seals can be found in the Arctic. More penguin facts later in the video, so stay tuned. After rotating a bunch of items in circles over and over again and deleting so many pieces that weren't actually necessary to create this building, it was time to work on the front glass facade. The combination of light concrete, white plaster, and glass has a quite chilly feeling, I think, especially with the addition of the marquee beams along the window edges. It adds this frosty metallic gleam to the front of the building. Glass does also allow heat to escape quite a bit more than other building materials, which for this building won't be too much of an issue even though the zoo is in a cold climate because the animals in here actually prefer slightly cooler air. Here we kind of have the opposite problem that when summer rolls around, they will need to be kept cooler. So this is why they will be kept in a building as opposed to outdoors. Now that the building shell is complete, I'm going to move it off the grid and into its spot in the zoo, just checking some sightlines to make sure it looks good as you approach it, and then it'll be time to start on the penguin habitat. Full disclosure, I did this a few times, so what you're seeing is the final attempt where I had managed to streamline the process. I actually built this whole building 3 separate times. The first time just to see if I could, the second time it was much too small, and then the third time here. I was about 2.5 hours in on the second build when I realized that there wouldn't be enough room for the penguins and the seals, because I'd somehow managed to screw up the math and made the building only large enough to shelter the penguins. Really tried to save that one, but in the end it felt like it would be more hassle to retrofit that attempt versus just starting a new one. So thankfully this is sandbox mode and that was possible. Here I'm terraforming so that guests can come down the path and get an underwater view of the penguins. They do need water that is 4 meters deep in order to dive in their tank, which I managed to achieve quite easily here. For the amount of work with the terrain tool, paths, and barriers, this habitat was actually kind of a breeze, which I'm super thankful for. And the water too, of course, it went in at the level I wanted it to the first try, which like never happens. Behind the main building, I also decided there would be an addition to provide the penguins with some backstage space. The pool would extend into this backstage area, and they would also have some extra private space. Plus a little kitchen for the keepers, a bunch of zoo clutter, the usual. So I copied over one of the walls from earlier and attached a grid piece to it to make it easy to copy over and over. And then once I deleted the grid pieces, I could easily slide the walls exactly where I wanted them. For the pool, I created this section of wall with some tiles that would be easy to copy and also give the idea that it's easy to clean. Penguins are not the cleanest animals. I'm sure the keepers will be quite busy with this enclosure. We're only going to have 5 of them in here to start, but I'm sure they'll get busy quickly and we'll have many little penguin chicks running around here soon enough. King penguins generally live in large colonies and huddle together for warmth in the colder months, similarly to emperor penguins, though emperors have a much more complex social structure. King penguins are more egalitarian, I guess you could say. When I think of a penguin, the emperor penguin is definitely the first one that comes to mind, but king penguins are a close second. They have some pretty key differences, the biggest being that emperor penguins inhabit the coldest Antarctic regions, while king penguins prefer sub-Antarctic islands with a milder climate. Still cold, but not as cold, like not minus 40 degrees Celsius cold. They'll often look for valleys where there's little snow to set up their colonies. Their size difference is also pretty notable and adapted to their respective habitats. The emperor penguin is larger at 4 feet tall and up to 100 pounds, while the king penguin is about 3 feet tall and up to 35 pounds. Since they live in warmer climates, they don't need as much body mass to survive. They also stay closer to the surface of the water when hunting, where it's warmer, and feed on mostly small fish and squid. Emperor penguins, on the other hand, have been known to hold their breath for 21 minutes and dive as deep as 1,850 feet or 560 meters in search of food. That's real deep, and I'm glad we don't have to build an enclosure that accounts for that. Instead, I'll be building a custom backstage fence here, trying to incorporate the staff gate into it. I wanted something kind of reminiscent of fishing nets. Added the mesh, could have maybe used the new Oceanian rope pieces, I'm always forgetting about those, but then added some of the rough rope pieces on top to make it look like the mesh is hanging in between the posts. Let me know what you think. If you like seeing these little custom fence builds, they're some of my favorites to do. With the backstage done, I'm going to be building a man-made pool out front for guest viewing. Used plaster this time instead of concrete. I like the texture a bit better and it feels less repetitive. The land portion is mostly going to be rock with some dirt and grass patches poking through. Not a lot of plant life where king penguins live, mostly low-growing grasses and some ground cover plants with nice little flowers. Antarctic bedstraw would likely be a plant that's found on a lot of the islands in the sub-Antarctic, and it's actually a member of the coffee family. I think the plant we have in-game that looks somewhat similar would be the coastal pigface from the recent Oceania pack, but even that is quite off in color and growing pattern. As you can see, I'm creating even more circles to fill in this part of the pool, and then we'll pull up the terrain as close as possible to create a more seamless look. Then we'll recolor the plaster to a light blue so it looks nicer underwater, and it's time to hide the edges with rocks. Lots of faux rocks in this build. I find they work super well for anything that's supposed to look more man-made, but I did also mix in some of the regular tundra rocks for the added texture. You'd think placing rocks would be super boring by now, but rock work and foliage work are still some of my favorite things to do in PlanetZoo. It's also nice that this habitat is quite a bit different from the other ones in TNS so far. It's nice to take a break from the same old foliage all the time. Kind of excited to be moving on to a new zoo in the near future once True North is complete. I did consider blocking off the view at the front with more rocks, but it didn't look particularly good, and I didn't want to just leave it open. I really wanted to entice guests to enter the building if they're on this side of the zoo. So after trying various solutions, I ended up using some art shapes instead, and we're going to pretend that these are like stickers or decals that have been placed on the window. Used the arc shape to create something sort of like waves, and that will go all the way across the front of the building. Once the first line was done, I decided to copy, offset, and change the color slightly to give it a 3D effect. And from there, it really just felt like a bunch of finishing touches. It's crazy how close you think you are to a finished habitat, and then you remember things like curbs and details like these water filtration systems. Gonna hide some bubble effects in here later. And this massive planter between the two pathways to separate the two enclosures and create more visual interest. Also obviously need enrichment items. The pool was looking very empty. So after placing enrichment items, I took some screenshots, posted them in one of the Discord servers, and got a lot of great suggestions about how to fill up this space more in a way that feels intentional. And the first of these suggestions was adding plants, but I wanted to keep the man-made feel, so I used a piece of mulch, surrounded it with small faux rocks, and then built my own kelp to place in the water. Have to be careful with this, since the penguins can't swim through it and sometimes even consider it walking space, so they'll walk on top of the water where the kelp is. Also added some more rocks to break up the viewing area and give the penguins something to swim through. Finally, the extremely high ceiling of this building was looking way too empty and like it wouldn't support its own weight, so I added some support structures through the center and then these beams to fill up the vertical space. It is still looking quite empty on the edges though, so if you have any suggestions for additions to the ceiling, please do let me know in the comments. And that's it for today. The building is obviously not finished because we still have another animal to add in there, so the tour will be next week once both species are in and the plaza in front of the building is also finished. For now, here are some shots of the brand new penguin habitat. They seem to be enjoying it so far. They also don't have names, so if you have any suggestions, please drop them in the comments below. And also, let me know what you're looking forward to seeing in next week's episode. See you next time. Bye.